opening to Goldfinger, and now I've had to hear it 3 times, so the song will definitely be in my head. Look for James Bond in disguise here. I think this is his first appearance as a bird. I think that's where the term gullible came from. So welcome everybody. It's great to be here on the last day in March in 2021, and hopefully the worst of the COVID is behind us, and we can go about our business, and maybe I can see you guys in person one of these days. That would be great. I came across, a friend of mine sent me this Trivia Genius quiz 2 weeks ago. And you may have gotten it as well. It says, who was James Bond named after? A real life spy, the creator's neighbor, an ornithologist, or a UK prime minister? First of all, I was offended that they considered this a trivia question. And then when I answered it, I found out that only 22% of the respondents knew who James Bond was and who he's named after. So hopefully by the end of the talk, you will get the answer right. So a little about me. My name is James, but like the real James Bond, I go by Jim. Like the real James Bond, I'm a Philly boy. And as you can see from that picture, I'm from Western Philadelphia. Like James Bond, I'm 6'2", the real James Bond. I'm 6'2", part Scottish, and my middle name even begins with a B. So I guess I was destined to write this book. A little about the book itself. It was a lot of fun to write. It took about 3.5 years, and it's got some great illustrations. And if you have a chance to go down to the Tide Pool bookshop, pick up the book. It just feels great in your hands. Schiffer Publishing did a beautiful job. I'm going to give you a taste of the book now. The book is also available as an audiobook and an ebook, but I think the best way to get the book is like a real live book. So here is a taste. This is Raphael Corkill, who narrates it. And this is the very beginning.
Introduction. A spy is born. The name of a man is a numbing blow from which he never recovers. Marshall McLuhan, Understanding Media. This is the story of the most notorious case of identity theft in history. Long before Ian Lancaster Fleming became a best-selling author, a single-minded Philadelphia ornithologist named James Bond wrote Birds of the West Indies based on repeated expeditions to the Bahamas and the Caribbean from 1927 to 1935. The 480-page book, published in 1936, featured black and white line drawings of birds by noted artist Earl Poole. It quickly became the must-have book on the subject. Fast forward to early 1952. Fleming was starting to flesh out his maiden 007 novel, Casino Royale, and needed a name for his imaginary secret agent. As he would often do when inventing characters for his books, Fleming simply lifted a name from real life. He looked at the distinctive white dust jacket of Birds of the West Indies on his bookshelf, noted the author's name in capital letters, and took it. James Bond. Period. No middle name, not even a middle initial. Just 9 purloined letters. A spy was born.
So one of the really cool things about the book, and I had fun doing, was it has about 100 illustrations, and many of them you've probably never seen before. Like there's actually a stamp from Mali, a postage stamp with James Bond on the stamp. And the bird on the upper right is a Cuban toady that's on the cover of 1936 edition of Birds of the West Indies. And when I was in Cuba, this bird landed right in front of me and I got that shot. one thing about the book, I'm trying to get people who love thrillers and people who love birds sort of put them together. But Julie Zickafoos, who is a great author and an ornithologist, wrote, "If the real James Bond does nothing more than convince readers that an ornithologist can be something other than proper, stodgy, or dull, it will have done a great service." There's just one trouble with that, and James Bond, when he was in his 60s, kind of looks like the dull, stodgy ornithologist that the stereotype is based on. On the left there, and I show this picture again later, but here he is holding two dead birds. He's wearing a suit, a bow tie with a suit, a pipe, and glasses. And I couldn't help think it reminded me of Wally Cox in the Beverly Hillbillies. There was an episode with Miss Jane Hathaway and Wally Cox called The Bird Watchers, and they kind of really set the standard, the gold standard for a bird nerd. Bond himself was actually quite handsome, and his wife insisted that he was more handsome than Sean Connery, which is sort of a spousal pride, I guess. But Bond was born in 1900 and lived pretty much the entire 20th century. One thing you should know about him was he was born very, very rich. His mother was a Roebling of the Brooklyn Bridge Building Roeblings. And that's a picture of her with her older son, Francis, and then James is on the right there. And on the right is James Bond's father, Francis Bond, who was a founding partner of E.B. Smith, which is better known as Smith Barney, which made money the old-fashioned way. With baseball season opening tomorrow, I thought I'd share this sort of sad anecdote. James Bond's father, the ornithologist, was an owner of the Philadelphia Phillies in 1903. And there was a lot of people in the crowd one day on the wooden bleachers, and there was a fight beyond the stadium, and they all crowded to look at the fight, and the bleachers collapsed. And I think 11 or 12 people died, 60 were injured, and it was a big mess. It was the biggest stadium disaster, perhaps to this day. And James Bond's father immediately sold his interest in the team for fear he would get sued. Unfortunately, the bad luck that began there followed them home. James Bond's older sister, Maggie, died at age 7 with a ruptured appendix in Maine near Mount Desert Island. And her father took a special train and yacht to Maine in time to see her before she died. It's an amazing story, but to me, it was amazing that it actually made the newspapers. This is what a big deal this guy was in Philadelphia at the time. To drown their sorrows, the Bonds built a palatial estate in Gwinnett Valley, Pennsylvania, 300 acres, and this was their house. And today you can go visit their house. It is the campus of Gwinnett Mercy University. That's the entire estate. And the administration building is what their house used to be. And it's, walnut paneling on the walls. It is an exquisite house. And you can see how big it is. It was mammoth. So tragedy continued. James Bond's mother died, and his father promptly remarried and moved to England. He gave his new bride that big mansion as the wedding present, then moved the boys to England, where Jim Bond was educated at Harrow, and he was teased for his American accent and all the old cowboy and Indian jokes. And his name is actually carved on a wall at Harrow to this day. After he graduated, he went to Cambridge and studied finances, and he was a C student. He was pretty mediocre. And when he got out of school, I want to do a little digression here. I know a few people in the audience go to Mount Desert Island in the summer. And I wanted to mention Jim Bond's uncle, Carroll Sargent Tyson. He was a famous painter. He did a series of fine arts prints on Mount Desert Island, appropriately called The Birds of Mount Desert Island. And there was like 20 of them in an edition of 250. And these are highly sought after today. And I have a couple on my wall, and they are just beautiful. Tyson was a great artist. This is a snowy owl that he painted, and that's one of the top posters. It is said that in the family, that when Tyson painted it, just like John James Audubon shot the birds that he painted, Jim Bond shot the birds that Carroll Tyson painted in this series. Tyson and Bond did a field guide, The Birds of Mount Desert Island. These guys had a real sense of humor. I think it was more Carroll Tyson, but I love this description of the common American crow. It's well known and widespread on Mount Desert Island, where it is jokingly referred to by some of the natives as soup meat. This was not your average field guide. The one thing about Carroll Tyson, he was a great artist, but he's probably best known for a painting he bought. When he was in Europe on a buying trip, he bought one of the 7 sunflowers paintings by Van Gogh. It is said when he got home, he didn't really like it that much, so he put it behind his place at the dining room table so he wouldn't have to look at it. The good news is that the Tysons donated sunflowers to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and it is one of the main attractions in the museum. It's the centerpiece of a rotunda that is the pride and joy of the museum. After college, Bond tried to be a banker, and he hated it. And it turned out one of his Tyson aunts left him a little bit of money. And Bond figured out if he invested it really wisely and lived like a bum, he could quit his day job and take a full-time job at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia and be an ornithologist. He did not get paid, and the upside of that was when the Depression hit, they didn't have to fire him because they weren't paying him anyway. He soon decided that his goal in life was to document the birds of the West Indies, and as you can see, that is a lot of islands and a lot of water. And James Bond, when he traveled by boat, got seasick. And so he was sick quite a bit during his career, especially his early career. He traveled by mailboat because that was the cheapest way to get to the Caribbean. And once he got there, he traveled by sloop, canoe, banana boat. He once bummed a ride on a rum runner to get to a faraway island. So he was quite a character. When he got to these islands, he traveled on foot or on horseback, and he typically lived with the locals. This is a charcoal burner's hut in the Zapata swamp in Cuba, and Bond spent 2 months there and lived off eating the local rodents. Hopefully they were cooked. The tools of his trade. This is James Bond's actual pocket knife. I found it in the archives of the Academy of Natural Sciences. If you look closely, the blade says "for flesh only," and thought that would be a nice title for an Ian Fleming novel. He also used arsenic as a pesticide, and he often collected the birds that he brought back using a double-barreled shotgun. I know it sounds kind of tough in today's climate to think of an ornithologist shooting birds with a shotgun. It seems unnatural, but it turns out that Bond was one of the greatest criticisms of him is he didn't shoot enough birds. These birds from the 1920s that he shot on the islands are time capsules, and they can tell you all about the population of the birds in those days, the environment, they're amazing. And researchers are learning more and more each day about these birds from the early 1920s birds that Bond collected. So the book was published. James Bond finally, after a decade, wrote The Birds of the West Indies, and this was his magnum opus, and published in 1936 by the Academy of Natural Sciences. It turns out that they tried selling the book to Joe Lippincott, who was the major publisher in Philadelphia, and Lippincott said in 1936, "Sorry, this is something for the museums, not for a publisher." Turns out the book in its various editions, contrary to Mr. Lippincott's opinion, stayed in print for more than 6 decades. And anyone who loved birds, who went to the West Indies, brought a copy of James Bond's Birds of the West Indies with him. It is considered the classic. I don't think you can buy a signed copy of the first edition. The second edition, the copy sold in November, signed by Bond for $5,000. So you might check your bookshelf, and if you have a signed copy of the Birds of the West Indies, it's worth quite a pretty penny. If it has a dust jacket, even better. One of the things I discovered when I was researching the book, turns out that 7 of James Bond's ornithological colleagues in World War II were spies for the United States, typically in the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which became the CIA. And I found this great book, Cloak and Dagger, and it talked about the nameless thousands of Americans who never made the headlines: doctors and editors and interior decorators, ornithologists and soda jerkers and truck drivers and cowboys who accepted voluntarily the loneliness of a hunted existence behind the enemy lines. So these guys really risked their lives, and they were all over the place. They were trying to prevent the Nazis from getting uranium in the Belgian Congo, as it was called at that time. They were in Southeast Asia, helping the insurrectionists against the Japanese. And they were all over the place and did some very dangerous jobs. It got me to thinking, after I was almost done the book, I said, you know, if James Bond he knew these guys, these 7 guys, he knew all of them, and they were spies, then I wondered, was James Bond himself a spy? And I went to the National Archives down in Maryland, and the other 7 guys who were spies, I found their OSS records, but there was nothing on James Bond. So I kind of discounted that he was a spy. Even though I think in this picture he kind of looks like one. I did a research on his travel records, and it turns out that James Bond in May of 1941 took the SS America from New York City down to the Caribbean. And I realized the SS America was the fastest, most luxurious cruise ship in the world at that time. And I'm thinking, what is a cheapskate like James Bond doing on the SS America? It just was not, he was on, mailboats, not luxury liners. So I look up spies and SS America, and up pops the Duquesne spy ring. Turns out they had 3 crewmen on the boat who were spies, and 2 of them were called the Butcher and the Baker. And after the cruise was over, all these guys were arrested and convicted of being spies for the Nazis. So it's kind of neat to speculate, well, maybe Bond was there as a secret agent spying on the spies. Maybe he was a counter agent. So I wrote to the CIA and said, hey, was James Bond a spy for the CIA or the OSS? And took about a month, and I got this lengthy letter of just bureaucratic manure. And the one key sentence said, basically they can neither confirm nor deny having such records. So I don't know if he was a spy. I tend to doubt it, but the CIA is not talking. So we'll fast forward to 1952 after the war, and Ian Fleming is trying to figure out, he was writing a new book, his first 007 novel. He needed a name for his protagonist. And I found this nice little film clip of Ian Fleming explaining how he got the name.
Mr. Fleming, how does an author tackle the problem of selecting a name for the hero of his stories?
Well, it isn't only the hero. I mean, I generally pick up names just driving through the countryside, through villages and so on. You'll see an interesting name over a tobacconist or chemist or something of that sort in any country in the world. But when I started to write these books in 1952, I wanted to find a name which wouldn't have any of this romantic overtones like Peregrine Carruthers or whatever it might be. I wanted a really flat, quiet name. And one of my Bibles out here is James Bond's Birds of the West Indies, which is a very famous ornithological book indeed. And I thought, well, now, James Bond, now that's a pretty quiet name. And so I simply stole it and used it.
The trouble was that although Fleming stole Bond's name, he never let Bond know that he had stolen it. And the books didn't become popular in the United States till the early 1960s when John Kennedy became president. And he announced in Life magazine one of his favorite books was From Russia with Love by Ian Fleming. And shortly after that, Dr. No came out, and one of the Bonds started getting late night calls from breathless young women going, "Hello, can I speak to James, please?" And Mary Bond and Jim Bond are going, "Why are these women calling late at night? What? There's got to be some sort of prank or joke that we're not in on." And one of their friends wrote a letter to Mary and said, "By the way, I was reading an interview with Ian Fleming in a men's magazine, and he says he took the name for his secret agent, James Bond, from your husband." So Mary Bond writes to Ian Fleming saying, "How dare you steal my husband's name? I think you've stolen some incidents from his real life, and I am shocked," and she was sort of tongue in cheek, but began a correspondence with Ian Fleming, who said, "Yes, you've caught me red-handed. I stole your husband's name. And if you ever come across a particularly hideous new creature, feel free to name it after me." So he also said that if you're ever in the West Indies, please stop by and see me. So in 1964, James Bond and his wife drop in unexpectedly on Ian Fleming. One of the servants says, "Hey, there is a guy claiming to be James Bond at the door." So Fleming goes out to see who's there, and Jim Bond introduces himself, and Ian Fleming's first words are, "You aren't here to sue me, are you?" And Bond said, "No, actually, I really don't care for your books at all." So Fleming took a sigh of relief, said, "That's perfectly understandable. Come on in, let's have a drink." And they had a nice time that day, had lunch, went for a swim. At the end of the day, Ian Fleming gets a copy of his latest book, You Only Live Twice, and he signs it to the real James Bond from the thief of his identity. Ian Fleming, February 5th, 1964, a great day. So just as Ian Fleming stole James Bond's name for his secret agent, I stole part of the inscription for the name of my book. So at first, James Bond didn't mind all the shaken not stirred jokes, and you have a gun when you go through customs. They always ask if he had a hidden pistol or spy decoder in his luggage, and it really started to wear on him after a while. And I think it really hit home when in 1965, as Goldfinger was coming out, Bond made a discovery that a bird thought to be extinct. One was actually found recently in Barbados, and Bond went down there, discovered it was the last known Eskimo curlew. And he wrote about it and did a big research paper, and it was in the news. And when Bond did something like this, typically, it would be in Scientific American or an ornithological journal. But he suddenly realized when he started reading the local paper and hearing from all his friends around the country that his name was James Bond, and now it was a big deal. And this is a sampling of all the headlines in the daily papers from back then. I think there was probably 70 of these articles, and they all had the headline writers had a field day. Every bad bird joke you can imagine was used in these headlines. His name is James Bond, and this one's for the birds. James Bond nabs a rare old bird, on and on. This was daily life for Jim Bond at that point, and he really got sick of it. Fortunately, the worst of the 007 ornithology connections really weren't made until 2002, when a movie called Die Another Day with Pierce Brosnan and Halle Berry came out. And in the movie, as you can see there, that is Pierce Brosnan holding a copy of Birds of the West Indies. And there's a famous scene I'm going to show for you now in which the connection is made forever. Just notice that Pierce Brosnan is the first person I've ever seen smoking a cigar and looking through binoculars at the same time. It is not easy.
Magnificent view.
It is, isn't it? Too bad it's lost on everybody else.
Mojito? You should try it.
Jacinta Johnson. My friends call me Jinx.
My friends call me James Bond. Jinx, you say?
Born on Friday the 13th.
You believe in bad luck?
Let's just say my relationships don't seem to last.
I know the feeling. The predators usually appear at sunset.
And why is that?
It's when their prey comes out to drink. Too strong for you?
I can learn to like it, if I have the time.
How much time have you got?
Until dawn. What about you?
Oh, I'm just here for the birds. Ornithologist.
So that kind of cemented the ornithologist James Bond connection. A little known fact about Die Another Day, it won an Oscar for the cheesiest dialogue of the year. So all the stuff with 007 and James Bond, what's gotten lost in all of it is that Jim Bond was really quite a conservationist and ahead of his time. And in the introduction to the Birds of the West Indies, he wrote about all kinds of things we talk about today: deforestation, the illegal trade in rare parrots. Talked about the need to create national parks where no hunting was allowed, which seems obvious today, but in those days he had to campaign for it. So much to his credit, he advocated all these things. And in that introduction, he wrote, "There can be no doubt that the principal factor that has resulted in the extinction or rarity of so many West Indian birds is man." And on the back cover of the 47 edition of the Birds of the West Indies, he actually has an ivory-billed woodpecker on the back cover, which at that point was pretty much extinct, and no one using his field guide was likely to see it. But he just wanted to have that bird on the cover to show how rare it was. So part of Bond's legacy, he also collected some amazing critters for science. Crickets. He has a stink bug named after him. All kinds of anything he could collect, he did. He collected 2 harpy eagle eggs on a trip to South America, and he also popularized the birds of the West Indies for generations of travelers. And so, if you're going to the West Indies and you love birds, you brought a copy of the birds of the West Indies with you. That is a red-billed streamer tail, the national bird of Jamaica. And there's a short story by Ian Fleming called For Your Eyes Only. And I think the first 300 words of the short story describe the red-billed streamer tail. So Fleming was also a bird lover. And I think that was one of the reasons he picked James Bond for his secret agent. So this is the Dr. Bird, that red-billed streamer tail. You can hear it. The tail feathers make this funny buzz noise, and you can be in a house and you can hear the Dr. Bird. Cling clings they make an appearance in The Man with the Golden Gun. And when I went to Goldeneye, Fleming's Retreat, cling clings were there at the restaurant undoing the napkins before dinner. They're very mischievous birds. It was great to see the same birds that Fleming wrote about actually at Goldeneye. Wrote about the Bahama parrot. It was thought to be extinct, and Bond bummed a ride on a rum runner and went to this remote part of the Grand Bahama Island and found a whole colony of them. And he was told by the local ornithologist in Nassau the birds were extinct. So on his way home, Bond stopped by the ornithologist's place. The guy wasn't home, so he left a Bahama parrot feather on the guy's doorstep to let him know they were not extinct as he claimed. And this is the Cuban toady on the cover of Birds of the West Indies. Finally, the real James Bond brought us all here tonight to celebrate him, beautiful birds, and the West Indies. I'm not sure I have the slide here, but I hope you know that by now that James Bond was named after an ornithologist and not a UK prime minister. So thanks for watching. And my book blog is realjamesbond.net. You can order and scribe copy my book from the Tide Pool Bookshop. And I'd be happy to sign it when I'm up that way. So I'm going to hopefully stop screening. I've stopped sharing my screen. We're back to real life.
Absolutely. And oh my gosh, that was just absolutely fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. Oh my gosh. So people, feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question or a comment or anything. And we'll just, I think, it typically works out okay if you
Right. Yep.
that way. I think, Jim, you're all set to have that happen, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Excellent. Excellent.
If you have a hacking cough, stay on mute.
Yeah.
So, John, Karen, you asked, where is that book now?
Yeah.
So, what book were we talking about?
Oh, the one that actually has the inscription from Ian Fleming.
So, I have a whole chapter of the book about that particular copy of the
I
book.
will get to it. Yeah.
It turns out that I went to the Philadelphia Free Library where all of Mary Bond's archives are located, and I looked on a list and said that book signed by Ian Fleming was part of her donation.
Wow.
So I said, could I take a look at the book? And they said, we don't have it. And I said, what happened to it? And they go, well, Mary donated the book. And then this is after Jim Bond died. She donated the book. And then her friend said, hey, that's probably worth a lot of money. So she took the book out of the library, like your average card holder, and then put it up put it up for auction. And it sold at Sotheby's for $72,000. And then it later sold again for, I'm sorry, the first time it sold for 28, it was later sold for 84,000. And I said, this is a shame because instead of being on view for everyone, the public can see it. Now the book is in some collector's his bookcase for his or her eyes only. And after the book came out, I get this Facebook note, Jim Wright, please call me. Jim Wright, please get in touch with me. And so I get in touch with the guy and he says, I have the book. And what I had no idea that Mary Bond had stolen her own book back. I had no idea it had this history to it. So I think it only adds to the mystique of the book.
Yeah,
That's great.
that is, it's wonderful.
I have another. We do spend time in Soamesville where the Tysons were, the Roeblings and all that. And I actually have one of the least. I had one of the least popular of those prints. It was the Red Hawk eating an animal or eating a prey.
That's great. How much do you want for it?
No, my question is sort of a little bit different because I think Philadelphia don't get no respect, as they say, in some respects. Because I think that museum, the Academy of Natural Sciences, is an amazing place. And you interviewed Bob Peck, I think, who's a wonderful guy, who's written on Edward Lear, but also about all the presidential hair that I guess.
Yes, I heard that talk.
But I gather there are a lot of so-called skins or ornithological thing. And it'd be kind of interesting just maybe to describe that museum because it's really quite a special place, I think.
Yeah, I kind of kicked myself as a kid. I'm not saying I was a nerd as a child, but I used to walk past the Academy of Natural Sciences to go to the Franklin Institute where I was taking slide rule courses.
Ooh.
People there, what is the slide rule? It's probably the most nerdiest instrument you've ever seen. It worked pretty well, but I'm not sure it was time well spent considering a calculator can figure out all that stuff in seconds. But the Academy of Natural Sciences is unbelievable. If you're in Philadelphia, absolutely go there. When the book came out, they actually have had an exhibition of several display cases about James Bond, some of the birds he collected, and they actually had bird sounds of those birds when you walk by the exhibit. So Academy of Natural Sciences is awesome. It turns out that their fish collection of the fish that Bond collected, many of the fish Bond collected ended up in Ian Fleming short stories, and including one on the cover of a later short story collection. They actually have that similar fish in their collection. So it's pretty cool.
Wow.
So Jim, there's a question here from Elizabeth Johnson. I'm just gonna, it says, is James Bond's book about the West Indies outdated now?
I think it kind of is. I hate to say it, but the newer books are unbelievable. And they're also called Birds of the West Indies. Why not? They're terrific. And they're much more modern, easier to read, a lot more color plates. The old ones I still love. And when I go to the West Indies, I'll bring my James Bond with me. But the current ones even have, I think, some QR codes where you can actually listen to birds and stuff by holding up your phone. So technology has really changed.
Yeah.
That's a really good question. You can still use the Birds of the West Indies. You probably won't see an ivory-billed woodpecker with it, though.
Yeah.
Oh, this is so interesting, Jim. Thank you. I'm just curious, what drew you to the subject initially?
I had a deadline coming up, writing a birding column for the Bergen Record. I needed a subject, and I read that 007 was named after an ornithologist. And I said, boy, this would be great if this guy was from New Jersey. And darn it, the guy wasn't from New Jersey, but he's from Philadelphia, where I'm from. And I wrote the column and pointed out that James Bond had an aunt from Trenton who encouraged him to become a birder and that's how I hung the column, just on this really flimsy thread there. But the more I researched James Bond, I thought he was amazing. And when I saw that pocket knife with "for flesh only" on the blade, I said, I am sold. I got to learn more about this guy. And he was quite a character. And you know, most ornithologists in those days, you know, they weren't paid, but they had a lot of money. And when they went on expeditions, it was like, you know, the Vanderbilt expedition, and they'd have porters and tents and eat gourmet dinners. And here's Jim Bond, you know, walking by himself or riding a horse in the Caribbean, living in a hut with the natives and eating the local rodent for dinner. So I really admired that in him. You know, he could have taken a real job and gotten paid like a real person, but he just loved birds. And he could be the classic bird nerd.
And my follow-up question to that, his wife, now, was she part of his expeditions, or was she tucked at home in Philadelphia?
I was so afraid you'd bring that up. So James Bond and Mary Bond got married the same year as Ian Fleming and his wife got married, 1952. And Bond had done most of his serious research before then. But she was an author and a poet in her own right, and just a lovely woman from all I can tell, aside from stealing a library book and selling it. But she wrote these books about Jim Bond, including my favorite is, hold on one second, I think I can dig it out here. I feel like it's show and tell. This is How 007 Got His Name by Mrs. James Bond.
Oh, wow.
She couldn't use her own name. It's like, come on. But she loved this so much. James Bond hated the 007 connection. She ate it up.
That's
And
great.
she wrote books, and I think she wrote 3 or 4 books to James Bond with love, on and on. And so she didn't go on these expeditions until later. And she gave James Bond a bad name with several ornithologists because they read these books, and she would often write about what drinks they had for dinner and what drinks they had after dinner. And it was, people thought he was just a lush traveling around the tropics with his wife, when here he was on horseback or on foot by himself. Earlier, they called him a desk jockey, and he was anything but. I had to write to the one ornithologist and correct him, saying your opinion of James Bond is totally wrong. So sorry you asked that question, aren't you?
No, fascinating. What a story.
Oh, that's great. Excellent. There's one more thing in the chat that someone is going to be bringing her six-year-old grandson to the West Indies because he's a bird nut. So,
Wow.
so that sounds good. So, and there's another Ahmed Hussein who says it reminds me of Salim Ali and his life, who led a similar lifestyle. He wrote the most, think went on.
The most important birding book of the Indian subcontinent. Yeah. I've heard of him. He is a legend. His co-author of that book, I believe, was Dylan Ripley of the Peabody Museum and later the Smithsonian. Little known fact, Dylan Ripley was a spy during World War II. And he knew James Bond, and they became buddies and went on cruises down to the south part of the Caribbean together. So I know I've sort of changed the subject, but yes. So Salim Ali is terrific. He's legendary, and probably, I hope someone's written a book about him. That would be awesome. And thanks for reminding me about him.
Oh, that's great. Well, spies and ornithologists, you know.
Joe asked me to remind everybody that there's some copies of my book at the bookstore. And in 4 weeks, I'm going to be heading through Worcester, and I would be happy to sign anybody's book. It's an amazing treatment, not to be missed. I stamp it with something, but I can't tell you because it's top secret.
Oh.
So I'll leave it at that. You won't be disappointed. And this is a pathetic pitch, but I would like to mention they make wonderful Father's Day gifts.
Oh, excellent.
Great idea, yes.
Excellent. That is a great idea. And you know what, I think that we have all of your email. We'll let you know when we have the date that Jim is coming through. We'll let you know, because that would be so great.
Yeah, this will be my first in-person bookshop appearance.
Excellent.
So my book came out exactly the same time as the pandemic.
I
can't wait to actually.
Timing is everything.
That's right. We feel your pain.
Yes, I'm sure even worse.
It would be our first this book signing as well. So
Great. That'll be terrific. I hope to see everybody then.
Yeah.
And stop by and say hello. You don't have to buy a book.
One quick thing. I think there might be another book here, because I don't know if you run across the name James Greenway, who is one of the great ornithologists. He was at the Museum of Comparative Zoology, but also in New York. And he was brought with the Marines to Guadalcanal. He wasn't a spy.
Wow.
But he also was a very well-resourced, that whole group. And it'd be kind of interesting to see if you went through the Museum of Comparative Zoology, you looked at the Naturalist Museum, looked at Philadelphia, and see if there was really a cluster of people that did what the other 6 that you identified, or 7. It's kind of amazing, because they really were able to go into jungles, know the territory, and sort of be able to kind of work their way around. And there might be kind of a real story there.
Yeah. I think that could be a book. There's enough of these guys, pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Like former prize fighters.
Yeah.
That became secret agents. So anyway, I think we're probably nearing our hour, but it's been great seeing you even via Zoom, and hope to meet you in person one of these days.